The candles had burned almost completely away. Only small pools of wax remained, trembling in the weak light that flickered across the walls of Hampton Court Palace. Catherine Howard sat alone in her chamber. She was 19 years old, and she could hear footsteps approaching. Not the gentle footsteps of her ladies-in-waiting, not the quiet movement of servants bringing food or fresh linens. These footsteps were heavier, measured, official. No one should have been walking these corridors at 11 o'clock at night. Just 6 hours earlier, Catherine had been the Queen of England, the wife of Henry VIII, the most powerful woman in the kingdom. A girl who had risen from relative obscurity to wear a crown that another queen, Anne Boleyn, had died for, and another, Jane Seymour, had died wearing. Now she was confined to her chamber, forbidden to leave. Guards stood outside her door. They refused to meet her eyes. And Catherine was waiting for something she could not yet fully understand. The king had not come to see her. He had not sent a message. Henry VIII, her husband of 16 months, had locked himself in his own apartments, and he had been crying for hours. Catherine knew this because the royal chambers at Hampton Court were connected. Walls built for grandeur carried sound easily. And through those walls she could hear the King of England sobbing. The man who once called her his rose without a thorn. The man who showered her with jewels. The man who praised her beauty to ambassadors across Europe. Now that same man was weeping like a child who had just discovered the world was not what he believed it to be. The footsteps stopped outside her door. Then came a knock, formal, official. The knock of someone delivering news that could not be avoided. "Enter," Catherine said. Her voice did not tremble. 16 months as queen had taught her one important lesson. Never let them hear fear in your voice. The door opened slowly. Archbishop Thomas Cranmer stood in the doorway. The Archbishop of Canterbury. His face was arranged into an expression of concern, but his eyes held something colder. Behind him stood several guards, far more guards than necessary for a simple visit. "Your Majesty," Cranmer said, but the title sounded different now. This morning it had sounded respectful. Now it sounded like an accusation. "I come on the king's business." Catherine did not move. "What business requires the Archbishop of Canterbury at this hour?" Cranmer stepped inside. "There are matters that must be discussed immediately," he said calmly. "They concern your conduct, both before your marriage to His Majesty and during it." The words fell into the room like stones dropped into still water. Catherine felt the ripples spreading through her mind. Someone had spoken. Someone had revealed something. And suddenly she understood. Everything she had built, everything she had survived to achieve, was about to collapse. The beginning of Catherine Howard's fall. History often remembers Catherine Howard only for the moment of her execution. The young queen who lost her head on the Tower Green in 1542. But the execution itself lasted only seconds. The real horror came before it. 3 months of interrogation, isolation, fear. 3 months watching her entire world slowly dismantled piece by piece. Friends arrested, secrets revealed, allies disappearing. And every day wondering whether she would live or die. Tonight, we are not simply telling the story of Catherine Howard's execution. We are telling the story of how she was destroyed. Catherine Howard before the crown. To understand Catherine's fall, you must first understand her past. Because Catherine Howard did not begin life as a queen. She was born around 1523. The exact date is uncertain. Her birth was not considered important enough to record precisely. Her father was Lord Edmund Howard, a man constantly in debt, constantly seeking patronage, and constantly failing to provide stability for his many children. Catherine's mother died when she was still young. Her father sent her away. She was placed in the household of her step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. In theory, this household existed to educate young noble girls. They would learn manners, music, courtly behavior, the skills required to marry well. But in reality, the Duchess's household was chaotic. Dozens of young relatives lived there, servants, wards, children. Supervision was minimal. The girls slept together in a large dormitory known as the Maiden's Chamber. And when the older women retired for the night, the supervision disappeared. Things happened in that chamber that would later destroy Catherine Howard's life. The candles had long since burned low at Hampton Court, but the night was far from over. Catherine Howard sat at the small writing table in her chamber, while Archbishop Thomas Cranmer watched her from across the room. He had not come simply to ask questions. He had come to ensure she answered them, and more importantly, to ensure she answered them alone. On the table in front of Catherine lay paper, ink, and a quill. Cranmer had given her a single instruction: write the truth. A full account of her life, her conduct before marriage, her conduct after marriage, everything. And he would remain in the room while she wrote. There would be no whispers to servants, no messages to allies, no opportunity to coordinate stories with anyone else who might already be under interrogation. The isolation had already begun. Catherine dipped the quill into the ink. Her hands were steady, but inside her mind raced, because she understood something very clearly. Somewhere in Hampton Court, or perhaps already in London, people were being questioned about her. Servants, old friends, members of the Duchess of Norfolk's household. And every one of those people might already have spoken. Every one of them might already have told investigators things she could not deny. She did not know what they had said. She did not know which secrets had been revealed. And that meant every word she wrote was a gamble. Admit too much, and she condemned herself. Deny too much, and the contradictions would destroy her. Catherine began writing. She admitted the first secret: Henry Mannocks, her music teacher. She wrote that he had paid her special attention when she was young, that he had behaved improperly, that he had touched her in ways that should never have occurred between a teacher and a girl. But she insisted on one crucial point. There had been no full relationship, no intercourse, only inappropriate touching. This distinction mattered enormously, because if Catherine had not been technically a virgin when she married Henry VIII, the king's pride would be wounded. But if she had engaged in a full sexual relationship before marriage, her entire marriage could be declared invalid, and that would transform humiliation into scandal. Next, she wrote about Francis Derham. This confession was harder, because the relationship with Derham had gone much further. They had shared a bed, many times. They had called each other husband and wife. They had exchanged gifts. They had spoken openly about a future together. In Tudor law, this raised a dangerous question: a pre-contract of marriage. If two people promised to marry each other and behaved as husband and wife, the law could consider that a binding agreement. And if Catherine had already been pre-contracted to Francis Dereham, her later marriage to Henry VIII would technically be invalid. Catherine denied that such a contract existed. She admitted the relationship. She admitted the intimacy. But she insisted there had never been any binding promise. She described it as youthful foolishness, a mistake, the product of a poorly supervised household. Then she reached the most dangerous part: Thomas Culpeper. Catherine knew the investigators already had witnesses. She admitted that she had met him privately. She admitted that Lady Rochford had sometimes stood watch outside the door while they spoke. But she denied the one thing that would mean death: adultery. She wrote carefully. They had talked. They had exchanged affectionate words, but nothing more. No betrayal of her marriage vows. No treason. When she finished writing, Catherine placed the quill down. Archbishop Cranmer rose slowly from his chair. He took the document from her hands, and he read every word, without speaking, without reacting. When he finished, he folded the paper. "This will be delivered to the king," he said. Then he turned toward the door. And Catherine Howard was left alone. But the interrogation had only just begun. To understand what happened next, you must understand something about Tudor investigations. When the Tudor government suspected treason, they did not simply ask questions. They built cases, complex, overwhelming cases. Investigators began by gathering testimony from everyone connected to the accused: servants, friends, relatives, enemies, every person who might know anything. Each witness was questioned repeatedly, their statements compared against others. Even the smallest contradiction was examined. Anyone who refused to cooperate faced consequences: loss of employment, imprisonment, charges of misprision of treason, the crime of concealing treason. And that meant almost everyone eventually talked, sometimes willingly, sometimes under pressure, sometimes simply to save themselves. For Catherine Howard, this meant something terrifying. Her fate did not depend only on what she said. It depended on what everyone else said. And everyone else was now under interrogation. The arrests begin. The arrests began quickly. Henry Manox was taken into custody. Francis Dereham was arrested soon after. Thomas Culpeper was arrested as well. So was Lady Jane Rochford, the widow of George Boleyn, and one of Catherine's closest attendants. Lady Rochford had helped arrange the secret meetings between Catherine and Culpeper. That alone was dangerous enough, but the investigators wanted more than arrangements. They wanted confessions. And one by one, the people Catherine trusted began to speak. Manox admitted everything about their earlier relationship. He described the touching, the secret meetings, details Catherine had hoped would never become public. But his testimony was not the most damaging. Francis Dereham's confession was worse, much worse, because Dereham confirmed the relationship completely. He described the nights in the maiden's chamber. He described how they called each other husband and wife. And he revealed something Catherine had not mentioned. When Dereham later arrived at court after Catherine had become queen, She had given him a position in her household. To the investigators, that looked suspicious. Why would a queen employ a former lover, unless she intended to continue the relationship? That interpretation alone placed Catherine in terrible danger. But the most devastating confession came from Thomas Culpeper. Culpeper was questioned separately. He did not know what Catherine had written. He did not know what Derham had confessed. And facing the possibility of a horrifying execution for treason, Culpeper chose survival. He admitted the secret meetings. He admitted the affection between them. And then he made a statement that sealed Catherine's fate. He confessed that he intended to have an illicit relationship with the Queen, and that she seemed willing. Intention. That single word mattered enormously. Under Tudor law, even the intention to commit adultery with the Queen could be considered treason. Catherine denied any such intention. Culpeper had confessed to it. The stories did not match. And when stories did not match, Tudor investigators assumed the worst.